urgent question, and we now move swiftly. If we could have a quick change, please, to the next urgent question. And to pose the urgent question, would members please sit down? Sir William Cash.
Will the Minister make a statement on UK negotiations with the EU in respect of Gibraltar?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the Minister for Europe, is currently in Gibraltar, where he is meeting with the Chief Minister to continue our joint efforts to conclude a treaty with the EU. With the Government of Gibraltar, he will also be assessing contingency plans are in place in case of a non-negotiated or no-negotiated outcome. His visit is also an opportunity to reiterate once again the UK's steadfast commitment to Gibraltar. In December 2020, the UK with Gibraltar and Spain agreed a political framework on how a future agreement between the UK and the European Union in respect of Gibraltar would function in the interest of all parties. This represented the first stage of a two-part process whereby the EU would examine a request from Spain in agreement with the UK to initiate the procedure for the negotiation of a separate UK-EU agreement in respect of Gibraltar. The key objective of the political framework is to safeguard Gibraltar's prosperity by ensuring that the people and goods can move easily between Gibraltar and the surrounding communities. This is important for the whole region's economy. The UK-EU negotiations began in October 2021. 17 rounds of formal negotiations have taken place in Brussels and London, and these have been supported by numerous technical sessions as well as official and ministerial engagements. The Foreign Secretary has met with Commission Vice President Šefčovič and separately Spanish Foreign Minister Alvarez, and underlined the UK's commitment to concluding a UK-EU treaty. The UK is steadfast in our support for Gibraltar and will not agree to anything that compromises sovereignty. While negotiations have been technically and politically complex, significant progress has been made. Both the UK and EU have presented texts throughout the negotiations. Agreement can only be achieved by respecting the balance of the political framework. Throughout this process, the UK government has worked side by side with the government of Gibraltar. Throughout our negotiations with the EU, the Government of Gibraltar have formed part of our negotiating team. Alongside our joint efforts to conclude negotiations, the Foreign Secretary and Chief Minister agreed that it remained prudent to continue working together to ensure robust plans were in place for all scenarios, including non-negotiated outcome. Alongside UK-EU negotiations, the UK with Gibraltar has maintained a regular dialogue with Spain. It is in everyone's interest to conclude a UK-EU treaty to help secure future prosperity for both Gibraltar and the surrounding region. This can be done without prejudice to our respective positions on sovereignty and jurisdiction. In conclusion, as I mentioned, the Minister for Europe is in Gibraltar today, meeting with the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister in Gibraltar. This is a continuation of the close working relationship between our two governments, both in our efforts to conclude an agreement and to ensure robust contingency plans are in place. While we're not able to provide a running commentary on negotiations, I can assure the whole House that the UK's position remains as it has been throughout. We will not agree to anything that compromises sovereignty. The UK stands steadfast in our support for Gibraltar and ensuring its sovereignty is safeguarded. Thank you.
Sir William Cash.
On Friday, the Minister for Europe wrote to me as Chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee. The Minister is there today, and following the grant of this urgent question and to prove its value, I received an urgent letter only 2 hours ago from the Chief Minister of Gibraltar proposing a meeting with my committee next Wednesday. The ROT was not covered by the Brexit withdrawal agreement or the TCA at the insistence of the European Commission. Temporary arrangements have persisted since, based around a political framework agreed between the UK and Spanish governments in December 2020. The government has exclusive competence to negotiate a treaty with the EU on the question of Gibraltar as an overseas territory. My committee travelled to the ROC in 2022. We've had meetings with the Chief Minister and his colleagues and in Gibraltar. I was disturbed to hear from the Minister that what appears to have been agreed in principle between the UK and the EU with regard to Gibraltar's future would include EU Schengen border checks being performed on Gibraltar, Gibraltar aligning with EU rules to ensure a so-called playing field, a level playing field, they say, and joint UK-Spanish management of Gibraltar's airport and therefore defence issues. If so, what the government has agreed, if so, crosses its own negotiating red lines, as first set out to my committee in September 2021. It risks setting a dangerous precedent for the UK's overseas territories and crown dependencies, allowing a foreign power to set the rules of our engagement and diminishing the constitutionally entrusted role which the UK plays. There are limited avenues for the people of Gibraltar to hold the UK government to account, and given the government's apparent eagerness to agree a legal text, I would also refer to those in Gibraltar who hold blue residency cards. I'm concerned that what's been announced will not allow them to cross into Spain relatively unhindered as they have in the past. Schengen border controls on Gibraltar soil could mean they become subject to the EU 180 days rule and the EU soon entry-exit system. Some serious questions. As to sovereignty and defence, will the government rule out agreeing to Schengen border checks on Gibraltar soil, ceding UK control of Gibraltar's airport and aligning with EU rules? What is the government doing to ensure the rights of Gibraltar's blue card holders? Is the government intending the UK to do all this by way of primary legislation? If not, why not? And finally, will the people of Gibraltar be offered a domestic referendum as they were in 2002 and 2006?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to provide reassurance that the government's position with respect to Gibraltar has not changed. We'll not agree to anything that compromises sovereignty. We continue to work side by side with the Government of Gibraltar, and we will only agree to terms that the Government of Gibraltar are content with. I know that the Chief Minister has appeared before the European Scrutiny Committee and provided evidence in respect of our proposed arrangement with the Schengen area. Our approach has not changed. The 2020 political framework notes that there will be a level playing field provisions in the treaty to agree mutual standards on matters such as labour, environment and taxation, the relatively normal elements of trade agreements with the EU or anyone else. And regarding the Gibraltar airport, we're prepared to explore practical and technical options to facilitate flights between Gibraltar and the EU. The UK will only agree to terms that the Government of Gibraltar are content with and will not agree to anything that compromises sovereignty. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's worth highlighting that in the letter the Chief Minister sent to my honourable friend, the member for Stone, he said that the UK and Gibraltar have never worked more closely together in delivering the outcome that the people of Gibraltar want. That's how it should be.
Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the honourable members for Stone for securing this urgent question and draw attention to my own declarations as Shadow Minister and membership of the Gibraltar APPG. And let me be clear, Labour's commitment to Gibraltar and indeed to our wider family of overseas territories is unwavering. And since I've been in this role, I have had the pleasure to meet with Chief Minister Fabian Picardo and his ministers and with other Gibraltar parliamentarians. I've visited the Rock myself as well as the Campo, and I've discussed these matters in Madrid too. Gibraltar is integral to the UK's history and to its future, with robust democratic institutions and a dynamic economy, and it also remains an important base for UK forces. So let me be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, if there was a new government here in the UK, there would be no change. The sovereignty and self-determination of Gibraltar are not up for debate. We believe in the right of the people of Gibraltar to choose their own future, as they have made clear, and this must be the bedrock of any negotiations with Spain, which of course is equally a close friend and ally of the UK and a critical partner in NATO and in many, many other respects. And we therefore hope and believe that an agreement can be reached to the mutual benefit of Gibraltar, Spain, the UK and the EU. Now, these negotiations have gone on longer than anticipated. It's critical that the government now works hard to get a good deal over the line and provides people, businesses and communities on both sides of the border with the clarity and stability that they need. I have a few short questions. Can the Minister explain in a little bit more detail where negotiations are on some of the key issues in relation to movement of goods, law enforcement and citizens' rights? Secondly, could you give us a little bit more detail on the Minister's visit to Gibraltar today, and indeed any recent discussions he's had with Spain and the EU on outstanding matters? Perhaps the Minister could make a statement on his return from Gibraltar. That would be very helpful. And finally, what support is the government giving to Gibraltar in terms of the NNO contingency planning? It's important, of course, that however we don't want to see that happen, that we're prepared for all outcomes. Gibraltar has a distinctive and proud place in British history, and I hope the government and all parties can get a deal that works for its people going forward.
Thank the honourable member for his comments, and we obviously agree. We need to stand steadfast in our support for Gibraltar, and I'd say it again, we will not agree to anything that compromises sovereignty. I think it's important that today's conversations that are taking place between the Europe Minister and the Chief Minister are setting out future discussions, but also looking at what might be, we hope not, a no negotiation outcome. And we'll be working very closely with the government in Gibraltar, and we'll continue to see what support they might need in any particular scenario that might arise. But we're working in good faith towards a deal.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I refer to my entry in the Register of Interest as Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Gibraltar. Would the Minister recognise that our group has not visited Gibraltar not once, but has repeatedly visited Gibraltar ever since the Brexit process, and has kept in regular touch with the people on the rock, their businesses and the government of Gibraltar? Would he also agree that ultimately the only people who are best placed to judge what is in the interests of Gibraltar are its British people, and that the first duty of a British government must be to protect their interests at all times? Would he also agree that the very, very close cooperation between Her Majesty's Government of the United Kingdom and that of Gibraltar is recognised on both sides, and that under no circumstances are either side prepared to cross any red lines, but that a pragmatic solution recognising Gibraltar's unique geographic position is necessary and achievable, and will he commit to the government's renewed determination to achieve that within those proper principles that we all stand by?
I'd like to recognise the important work of the APPG under the honourable member's stewardship as chair, and the important work that he's done in engaging with the people of Gibraltar and with the government there as well. He's right. You know, there are opportunities not just to protect sovereignty, but also to ensure future prosperity for Gibraltar and for the people of Gibraltar. And what I'd like to restate and underline, and it was very clear in the letter that was sent to the honourable member for Stone, I highlight these words, you know, that the UK government and Gibraltar have never worked more closely together, which is entirely right, given the seriousness and where we're at in the negotiating process.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to hear the cross-party outbreak of support that there is for nations choosing their own future. It's very unusual in this place. The UK has, over recent years, managed to trash its international reputation. Will the Minister let us know how much Brexit has cost Gibraltar so far? And will the Minister promise this House that the government will, this time, stick to its agreements, stick to the statements that it made to the member for Stone's committee, for example, stick to those positions that it held, and negotiate in the interests of the people of Gibraltar, not in the interests of ideological power trips?
We continue to work very hard in these negotiations. As I said earlier on, we're working in good faith. We're working to uphold sovereignty and also to work towards future prosperity, which is vital, both for the people of Gibraltar and for the region more widely as well. We're optimistic about those prospects, but we're planning for all scenarios.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Can the Minister assure this House that the UK Government will not agree to any treaty that compromises UK sovereignty and remain steadfast in its support for Gibraltar? There's a large Jewish community in Gibraltar and significant anti-Semitism from the Spanish government, which has actually led to a recall of diplomatic personnel only 3 months ago. It's particularly important that in our negotiations with the EU and anyone else, that the sovereignty of all of the people of Gibraltar is respected. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. We need to respect that sovereignty, and I stand shoulder to shoulder with my right honourable friend. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Minister. We cannot compromise on the sovereignty issues that Gibraltarians hold so close to their hearts. He was right to point out the practical and technical options in respect of the airport, which also serves as RAF Gibraltar. Can he perhaps outline some more on what practical and technical options he's thinking of in relation to the airport? And before I do so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I really should also have drawn members' attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests as well.
The point I was making about practical and technical options are in relation to facilitating flights between Gibraltar and the EU more widely. The UK will only agree to terms that the government of Gibraltar are content with, and will not agree to anything that compromises the sovereignty within that aspect.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Can the Minister explain to us its assessment of the attitude of the European Union towards the continuing sovereignty of Gibraltar, bearing in mind Spain's long-standing ambition to infringe that sovereignty?
Our negotiations are with the EU, and we continue to take those negotiations forward, and will do, as I said repeatedly, with the sovereignty of the people of the Gibraltar at the front of our minds.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, one of the things that we do need to recognise in this debate, and I thank the member for Stone for organising this question, along with those of us who support the sovereignty of the people of Gibraltar and their rights to self-determination, is, of course, 96% of them didn't vote for Brexit to happen. So this whole scenario, when the member opposite talks about giving them a voice, perhaps he needs to listen to why. I'm very struck by what the Minister said about the value of a level playing field and the concept of alignment of trade, economic rights and standards to be able to encompass that. Can he just clarify then, for avoidance of doubt, like many of us feel, there is no conflict between supporting sovereignty and supporting alignment, and the lessons that might have for other negotiations coming forward in this field?
The point I made is that these issues that the Honourable Member talked about in terms of level playing field provisions are normal elements of trade agreements with the EU or anyone else. In line with what the UK agreed with the EU under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement in this area, commitments should be bilateral and reciprocal and not based on the rules of either party.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. By my reckoning, my honourable friend has this afternoon said no fewer than 5 times that the British government will not agree to anything that compromises British sovereignty. But it's clear from the letter from the Minister for Europe that travellers arriving in Gibraltar will have to pass through Schengen immigration arrangements. How can it be the case that British travellers arriving in British territory will have to deliver their passports for inspection to a foreign border official, and that not be incompatible with British sovereignty?
We're seeking a mobility arrangement with the Schengen area to facilitate flow at Gibraltar and the Spanish border. This arrangement would remove checks from the Gibraltar-Spain border. Instead, those arriving in Gibraltar would pass through Gibraltar immigration, followed by Schengen immigration. The exact details of arrangements form part of the ongoing negotiations. In line with the December 2020 political framework, as a default, those travelling to Gibraltar will undergo both Gibraltar immigration controls and Schengen entry checks.
Tamerjit Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. During my visits to Gibraltar, including recently with the Excellent Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I appreciated not merely that it's an incredible place, but also in the Gibraltarians' firm commitment to uphold their sovereignty. But Minister, what assessment has been made of the ongoing impact of the uncertainty on the economy of the ROC, and what steps are being taken to catalyse growth in the region?
That is why we're taking forward these negotiations. It's about future prosperity and about protecting sovereignty. That's the fundamental part of it. And that's why the government in Gibraltar are keen to be working with us and have said that they're working in good faith and feel that our relationship is stronger than it's ever been.
Andrew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, as the House will be aware, Goole is twinned with Gibraltar, and I was in Gibraltar on Friday. The Minister looked shocked. I'm sure he realises it's a match made in heaven. I was in Gibraltar on Friday in the Parliament, a meeting with their Mayor, Carmen Gomez, and the very clear message sent to me on this issue was the importance of a resolution, not least because of the large number of Spanish workers who make their living in Gibraltar, and that is a point worth remembering and emphasising in these negotiations. But will the Minister also confirm that any arrangement will not make any difference to the rights of a British national to live and work in Gibraltar?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't know why I look shocked, because it's pretty obvious from the hard work of my honourable friend that where Goole leads, the rest of the UK follows. We're working hard on as I said earlier on, the border issues at the airport and more widely, and the aim is to reduce the friction that will be in place.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his answers to the questions and a clear commitment. We have always had a great relationship with Gibraltar, and I'm a big supporter of that, as indeed others are in the Chamber as well. It is so important our relationship is maintained with strength and pride as we are able to work better together. Will the Minister ensure that all efforts are made to continue our much valued relationship with Gibraltar, and that we do all that we can to support them as a British overseas territory with the same rights as everyone else?
Now, I recognise my honourable friend's commitment to Gibraltar, along with that of most people in the Chamber today. I think there's a huge amount of work, and not least of which the work that the Speaker does as well, to foster that relationship, which we're very proud of. He can be assured we'll continue to work that way. I think the best feedback that we received today as well from the Chief Minister is that actually they believe that they've got a good working relationship with us, probably the best we've had, and we'll continue to work together in their interests on that basis.
Ranulph Wardina.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What is my honourable friend's assessment of the joint declaration signed with the British Overseas Territories? Does it provide, in his view, the right basis to work with them more closely in the future, including Gibraltar? And given the threats faced by Britain and her allies around the world, does he agree with me that our overseas territories are more important than ever?
No, I completely agree with him on the latter point, no question. And I think in terms of the joint declaration, that sets out a more modern framework for our relationship with the overseas territories. We're going to be setting out a strategy for the overseas territories with the overseas territories over the months ahead, and then we'll move on to partnership compacts. We need a more modern relationship where the accountabilities are clear, not just between FCDO and the overseas territories, but across the whole width of Whitehall. I think that's something we want to see on both sides of the House. It's entirely appropriate in the world that we sit in and work in today.
Robin Walker.
Mr. Speaker, having spent 2.5 years engaged in the Department for Executive European Union with Gibraltar and chairing the JMC for the overseas territories in that process, I was very glad to hear the Minister today confirm a Minister is in Gibraltar talking to the Chief Minister directly. Would he agree that, as well as reiterating our position on sovereignty, it's important we show respect for the views of the people of Gibraltar, both in their determination to remain British and in electing their own government? And we must continue, as the Chief Minister has said, to work hand in glove with the Chief Minister and the Government of Gibraltar.
Understood, and given his experience, he knows these matters are very important and that they're very technical and they've taken time, but absolutely we need to work hand in glove, shoulder to shoulder with our friends in Gibraltar and making further progress, as we seem to be right now, but we prepare for all the eventualities that might happen.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've listened carefully to what the Minister has said. but fear that there are still many questions to be answered around the sovereignty question so ably raised by my right honourable friends for Stone and Clwyd West, and very particularly what it means for blue card holders on the rock. So when the agreement is made between governments, will the Minister ensure that both the European Scrutiny Committee and the whole House has a full chance to fully scrutinise this agreement so that we can come to a conclusion ourselves on those questions?
One of the principal objectives of the treaty is to provide for the fluid movement of all people in Gibraltar across the border with Spain. And of course, there will be scrutiny. The Chief Minister said that he'd be very willing to appear in front of the European Scrutiny Committee, as will the Minister for Europe in the near future.
I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question, and we now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Martin